Hello. Today I'm going to tie for you a Czech Nymph. Now it is not an exact match for any of the food sources in the streams where I fish, but it has characteristics that must look like food because it does catch fish. Now we're going to tie this on a size 10. I have these just listed as caddis hooks. The original packaging is destroyed. I think they may have been TMC. A key characteristic of a Czech Nymph is the Czech latex glove that we use for the shellback, a strip about an eighth inch wide. That's not cut perfectly, but it won't show up later. And then one of the other things, I went through a phase where I was going to tie one of every one of Frank Sawyer's um, nymphs and fish with those. So I rounded up a modern equivalent of his Chadwick's 477, I think it is, the killer bug yarn. But I use it in a lot of other places. We're going to hold everything together with that's fluorocarbon. I'll talk about that a little more. And going to use a little lead-free wire to shape the body and add some weight. Tie it with tan Uni-Thread. And we're going to use the yarn, but we're also going to add some Life Cycle Caddis Dubbing, a rib of gold Mylar. And on this fly, I'm going to use a 1/8 inch, I'd call it black, but it's more just dark gray bead. And so there's one of the little things I do different. I have the lead-free material pinched in the pliers and I wrap it toward me from back to front so that my thread wraps, and I flatten that tag end out a little bit, and the thread wraps will kind of tie that loose end tighter rather than want to unwind it. So I don't know. I think you can manage it either way, but this is just one of the things that I like to do. And you'll see that pinched down tag end gets pushed on the far side and helps smooth the transition between the hook and the lead. And we're going to fill that in with some tying thread, kind of make a nice taper there, a nice transition. And then once or twice up and back, just to kind of hold all the, I'm calling it lead, but lead-free material in place. So we'll snip off the excess and move the thread back. And in this case, it's a curved hook and we want to use probably more of the shank. So we want to go a little beyond the barb. And that's going to be our starting or stopping point, depending on which end you're coming from. So the first material that I'm going to tie in is going to be that monofilament. And actually, like I mentioned earlier, it is fluorocarbon. So if you read about fluorocarbon and monofilament, one of the things that fluorocarbon never breaks down or is more resistant to breaking down. And that's one of the reasons that you shouldn't leave pieces lay along the stream. But when I'm using it to build a fly, I feel like it's going to last longer. Um, Also, it doesn't stretch like mono, and I don't know if that's an advantage or not. These are just things that I get in my head, and then once I do, I think I'm using that information the right way. So next material is the Mylar um, tinsel, and it's gold on one side, silver on the other. And I have it tied in. You'll see later. I'm going to counter wrap that so it doesn't sink into the dubbing or into the yarn. So there, our thread came apart a little bit. I picked up some fuzz along the way, so we'll have to correct both of those. It's about here I noticed that the thread separated, so give it a spin, get the yarn out of the way, and a couple of wraps will help bring it back together. And then kind of like anything else, a pheasant tail or something else, you get a couple, three wraps over the material right there where the tail would be, and then move the thread out of the way and we're going to wrap it. So I was working between the camera and the hook for a little bit there and it got a little awkward. And so I have a rotary vise and um, I think it makes this kind of stuff easier, especially with a camera between me and the hook. So here we go. And then that butt section I left stick out the back. I'm going to trim that later, and then this is a double-stranded material, and it'll kind of stay separated a little bit and look like those little gills or the little feet-looking things that are on the back of some of those. They call them rockworms or free spinning caddis. The caddis that don't like make a shell and live in the shell. So a lot of the caddis patterns call for a hot spot, typically orange or pink. I've heard people describe that as the caddis that might be pregnant or a caddis that is infected with a certain bacteria. In either case, it's a hot spot, and it seems to add a little bit. Just like any hot spot, it kind of attracts fish. So, and then in front of that, I just went with a darker noodle of that caddis Life Cycle Dubbing. But anything spiky, spiky might have been better here. Some hare's ear mask or something, or but spiky dubbing in a darker color just to finish off the front. And if this wasn't a bead head fly, uh, yeah, that would be would help form the head. So maybe a little more dubbing just to kind of fill in the low spot there. There's a few things we're going to wrap down, and that'll kind of get filled in as we go. So I'll trim off the stray hairs that are sticking up. And the next thing, if you'll notice, a lot of the Czech Nymph patterns call for the shell to be tied in back at the tail. So I'll tell you a little bit about that while we're wrapping the Mylar. So I started to go in the wrong direction. I told you up front I was going to counter wrap this, and then I started to go in the wrong direction, realized that, and then brought the Mylar back to me and underneath, and I'm doing the counter wraps. But you'll notice I didn't tie in that strip of latex yet from the Czech glove. And this is kind of one of the things that makes this fly easier for me to tie is doing it this way, tying it in at the end and working back. You'll see. So the rib's in 4 or 5 wraps. Too many wraps make it a little too shiny, a little too flashy. And again, it depends on where you're fishing. In darker water, maybe that's better. So this is a good place to add a whip finish. We don't want things coming loose. And here we go. We have that strip of latex. And that was just, cut with scissors out of that glove I showed earlier on. And I leave a little flap over the top. That may be a little more, and I'll trim a little bit of that off. That may be a little more than I wanted, but it helped me get things in the right place. So flip it up and take about half of that away. And I'll go back and I'll get that fluorocarbon, that monofilament, in position and get ready. I'll pull the latex back and tilt it a little bit to my side and take kind of a loose wrap over the top and then start to pull it so that everything moves into place. And then once we do, we're essentially counter wrapping or wrapping over top of everything here. And I guess it's not counter because it is going the same direction as the thread. But we're using that monofilament to hold everything down to help make segments in the body. And wrapping from back to front, I don't know, it kind of makes it easier for me. I didn't have to stretch the shell off over the back, tie it down, and then hope that the wrapping of monofilament didn't move the shell. So there we have it. We're almost done. And I'm going to add a little dubbing. Now, another thing that might have been good either here or just below under the head would have been to use either some peacock curl, or I've seen folks use peacock dubbing too. There's something magical about the green glow of peacock under this thing or in the front, but I just used a little more of that brown dubbing to kind of fill in the gap. And I'm behind a bead, so I like to add head cement here, or in this case, a little bit of super glue. And I'll take a couple of wraps and whip finish, and I'm pretty sure that's not going to come loose. So we're good there. We can snip the thread off or slice the thread off. And then I'm going to go back and trim the excess latex out of the way. And the fiddling here is because I was trying not to block the light. And then I kind of just gave up. I do want to leave a little bit of that tag stick out from underneath of those wraps of mono. And then here's where we're trimming the 2 strands of that yarn. Maybe about an 1/8 inch long or so, just to represent those the gills or the fuzzy stuff that hangs out the back of those caddisflies. And then here, grab your favorite marker. In this case, I think that's a kind of for posters. So it's got red on one end and brown on the other. I would use it for this kind of stuff a lot. But if you darken the back and kind of wipe it, it pushes some of the extra ink into the lines around the rib, which kind of looks fishy, buggy, more like food. And I'll just brush out a little bit of the fibers up front, and that fly's ready to fish. So you can obviously do these in different sizes and colors, and you can try and match bugs that live in your waters, but I don't find that to be a requirement. And I hope this helps you out. If you want to learn more about me, look me up on Amazon. And if you hung in there to the end, thanks for watching. And until next time, be safe.